Hello, my friends. In this video, we are going to analyze each shot of the trailer for the newly announced Silent Hill F. And by the end of the presentation, I will give my informed guess on what this game is going to be about. Just a quick disclaimer, everything I will be talking about here is from an outsider's perspective, based on reading materials available online. The links to all references used can be found in the description. From what I gathered, the main topic we are dealing with here is Japanese Buddhism and the afterlife, which is a subject matter rife with multiple interpretations and amalgamations. As mentioned by Matthew Mayer in his article titled Meido, the Japanese Underworld, he says, "When Buddhism was brought from India to China, it took on a structure of its own, merging many aspects with Chinese philosophy and Taoism. This mixture was imported to Japan, after which it began to develop its own unique features as well." So, our approach would be to look at everything with a wide lens, so we don't get lost in the forest of details. It's most likely that Ryukishi07, the writer for this game, exercised his artistic freedom anyway, so this approach is probably best. According to the official Konami page on Twitter, Silent Hill F is set in Japan during the 1960s, a decade highlighted by societal change and unrest, brought about by an economic boom, among other things. I'm not sure how far the writer will reference that time period in the game, but one detail I noticed in the trailer, which is reflected in real history, is that a lot of young people who lived in rural areas migrated to densely populated urban locations. An article from the Asia Pacific Journal by Oguma Eiji titled Japan's 1968, A Collective Reaction to Rapid Economic Growth in an Age of Turmoil states, "The urban migration overwhelmingly consisted of youth. By 1965, 42% of Japan's urban population and 47% of Tokyo's was between 15 and 34 years of age. It was such a huge event that one study I found by Edwina Palmer called it a rural depopulation." We see this being portrayed in the shots, as the young girl started out in a mountainous road, which is followed by a rural village that eventually takes her to an urban-looking setting. As mentioned earlier, this game is heavily influenced by Japanese Buddhism beliefs on the afterlife. And in an article at Kansai Odyssey, it says that when a person dies, his spirit goes on a journey called Chuin, to the underworld that sits between the land of the living and where the dead are supposed to go, called Meido. And it begins with a path down a very long mountainous road, which is what we see in the first few shots of the trailer. Seen here are rice paddies and an odd-looking scarecrow holding a scythe in a girl's school uniform that closely matches what the character is wearing. By itself, that is already quite interesting, but I could not find any meaning behind it until I got to examine this shot where we can see a broken Jizo statue. According to an article at Oku Japan by Ilse Montalde, Jizo statues are made in the image of a deity named Jizo Bosatsu and handles the protection of kids who passed away. But equally as important, they also serve to protect travelers, which is related to one of the symbolisms behind crows in Japanese folklore. One article at JapanTruly.com states, "Crows are divine birds that symbolize guidance and good luck." So, in my opinion, if we put those two things together, the broken Jizo statue and the scarecrow represent just how difficult her journey is going to be. No guidance, no luck, and no one to protect her. At least we get to see that she is no helpless maiden, as evidenced by the bloody pipe she's dragging, a character trait she is definitely going to need. But that's not all there is. To accentuate just how dire her situation is even further, we also see a close-up of a doll that later gets taken over by the pink mass, which seemed to mirror exactly what happened to the girl in the following shots. I tried to find out what the doll had to do with anything, and it turns out, according to this article from Moon Mausoleum, there seems to be a famous urban legend surrounding a somewhat similar-looking Ichimatsu doll called the Okiku doll. According to the stories, it was owned by a young girl who died from a disease, and the people who took care of the item after she was laid to rest noticed that the doll's hair was growing at a rate similar to that of a young girl, which led them to believe that her spirit got trapped inside. If this connection was the intention of the writer, then we are being made aware that there's no escaping wherever this character is right now. This brings us to the red spider lilies, also known as hellflower, corpse flower, or flower from the other shore. According to an article from Metro Field Guide titled Folklore and Nature, the Death Flower, the names came from an observation that they are usually planted around graves, and the red color, according to superstition, was due to the flowers drawing blood from the dead. In the game, they took it a step further. From the first time we see it in the trailer, we can tell that there's something sinister about the flowers, as they do not sprout from the ground, but rather on flesh, clearly visible here. And in a later shot, we get to see it in action, when one of the vines latched onto her arm and red bulbs start to sprout from her skin. After being overwhelmed by them, we see her floating on a raft in a body of water that's most likely an interpretation of the Sanzu River, which spirits must cross before they move on in their journey. Also in this shot, we can see a torii gate, very similar to the one found in Itsukushima Shinto Shrine, that represents a passageway to another realm. From here, we can see her raft being surrounded by hellflowers, sprouting from body parts floating in the water, that puts a stop to her journey, and ultimately to her. Which is a terrifying thought because, according to the Kensai Odyssey article I mentioned earlier, a big portion of Japanese Buddhism is about the cycle of rebirth. When one person dies, their spirit goes through a trial, and is reincarnated as part of a loop. The corpse flower in the game stops it from happening, an entity that brings permadeath, if you will. But a question I had in mind was, why manifest itself as red spider lilies? From the piece earlier written by Mayer, it states that the trip to Meido is not a pleasant hike. There was a mention that the corruption of the living world turns into sharp swords that pierce through travelers, and the spirit's greed back when they were still living materialized itself as sharp thorns on the side of a mountain they have to climb. So, it may very well be that the red lilies are a manifestation of her punishment for something she did, because as it turns out, that flower is highly poisonous. Could she have used it to off somebody? Or worse, maybe she used it on herself, a grave sin in their religion that would get her stuck in the underworld. From here, we can get a partially clear picture of what's going on. Yes, I think this girl is already dead. That's why we don't see her eyes all throughout the trailer, even in the very last shot, which is a frontal close-up. And the game is all about her journey through the underworld, all the while being pursued by the very thing that brought her there in the first place as punishment. If you made it this far into the video, most likely you're a fellow fan of the series. So which of the announced games are you excited about? This one stood out to me the most because it seems like a great fresh take on the IP. Townfall is also quite interesting. The teaser is filled with secret messages last I heard. And what about Silent Hill 2 Remake? Are you interested in playing that? Let me know in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.